I'm going to tell you a booger tale before I let you go. And then I'll wind her up with a bit of a meeting house song that my granddad used to break up meeting with years ago. If any of you are interested, I've got a couple little demo tapes here. It's all that I've got with me tonight. That they're just $4 a piece, but I've got a couple of songs on there and a tale or two. I might as well get rid of them while I'm over here. Some of the Appalachian bookstores should carry the copies of that documentary that I made called The Ballad of Frankie Silvers. It's it's supposed to be on the public TV sometime in the near future. They're making a little longer version of it. Apparently on public TV you've got to have everything a certain length of time before they can use it. But this is a story about a little boy that went out one day to dig taters. And it was a windy day, and he was out there digging. He come down a tater hill with his tater digger, and he couldn't pull it out. He pulled so hard, finally it jerked up, and he fell down backwards on the ground, all shook up, and he got up and knocked the clods off the end of his tater digger, and there was a big old bloody piece of meat on the end of it. Well, he couldn't figure where that come from, but he got to thinking where he was going. He took it to the branch and washed it off and carried it to the smokehouse, skinned it and cut it up real good and salted and peppered it, and took it to his mammy, who they lived in, of course, an old log house back in the days before lights and everything. They had a lean-to kitchen with a cook stove in there, and she was going to cook some beans, some soup beans for supper, and they didn't have any seasoning. And so he told his mother that Granny sent some fat back for the beans. And so she cooked that piece of meat in the pot and had a big pound of cornbread to eat with it. It was so good and juicy it'd run down your chin, they said. That night, though, after supper, his little boy's daddy, I guess I called him little, I guess he's 13 or 14, told him that he had to look after his sister. She's about a year younger than him, and his baby brother Billy that night. But him and his wife had to go set up with somebody, I think. I don't know if somebody died that they were kin to or just somebody sick, but they'd be gone most of the night. And he had a fire built up in the fireplace and said, if you want anything to eat, just pop you some popcorn, but keep the door bolted. They had, in the old days like that, and they were in an isolated area. They had them big old thick doors about 2 or 3 inches thick, and you could bolt them on the inside, put that bolt in a slot, and take a bullnozer to knock it down. Well, they played the old-timey games like kids used to play, hoopy hide and jack in the bush, till the fire died out, and they didn't have no lamps lit. They just crawled up in their mom and dad's bed. You see in them old houses, usually the front room was like a living room and guest room and parlor and bedroom all, and the young'uns generally slept up in the loft. Well, they just climbed up in their dad and mother's bed when the fire died out and laid down there, and the little boy's just about to doze off to sleep when he heard something coming. Off down the hill, he first thought it was his pap and mother, and he knowed they wasn't coming slipping up toward the house. Something going like, bump, bump, bump. And every step or two, he'd hear something like a stick or something raking in leaves going, bump, bump. Finally, it thumped right up on the porch, and that doorknob went to turn, and he could hear it in the dark, shaking. He knowed nobody couldn't get in, but he's afraid the old saying might be true about it. There's more than one way to skin a cat. And he was sitting up there in bed by that time with his mouth hanging open down on the covers, his tongue laying over on the floor, and listening real hard. He quit turning the doorknob and started around the porch. Bump, bump. Finally, it went all the way around the house till he heard it at the chimney. Old rock chimney daubed up with clay and sticks and mud and stuff. And got to hearing something scratch, scratch. Now, on the rock sounded like you took your fingernails and rubbed down a chalkboard or something. But it got scratching a little higher. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Finally, it scratched right up on top of the chimney. Well, he knowed in reason that it weren't Santa Claus. It weren't even the time of year for Santa. And he figured the only thing to find out who that was just go and see. So he turned over and elbowed Sister. She was in the middle and said, Sister, Sister. Sister said, what? Said, honey, slip over at the fireplace, sugar, and peep up through there and see what kind of bird's making that choir racket and come back and tell us. Sister said, who? He said, you. She said, you're as deep in the mud as I am in the mire. Said, you go find out your own self. He said, well, get Brother Billy to do it. He ain't got no better sense. She turned over and said, Billy said, what? Said, honey, slip over and see what's making that racket and come back and tell us. Ain't nothing to be afraid of. He said, that can't be your mouth a-talking. It knows better. He said, you just go your own self. So they argued right quiet like for a minute to see who would go. And finally, the bold one of them went. And you might know who that was. As usual. Sister got up and started over to the fireplace. That boy was just he's scared to death. It's a good thing she didn't knock any chairs over. I guess that all had heart attacks. But she made it over there to the fireplace and bent down and looked up. Sure enough, there's a big old dark shadow up there in the chimney. And it wasn't cloudy that night, and she ought to have seen the stars, she thought. But she looked down there in the fireplace and seen there's some coals still kind of hot, and she knocked the ashes off of them and blowed on them a little bit and got a little bit of fire going till she could see by. When she looked back up there, she said that her heart just about didn't stop beating. Instead of coming down through there head foremost, that means head first, of course, was the awfulest looking man or booger man that she ever seen in her life. Said he must have been dug in by his feet because the bulk of him was hanging down, his arms out in front of him. Said his fingers were going just like that. Said he had old long bony fingers and sharp dirty nails, and he's just wiggling them back and forth in front of his face. Back and forth. Said he had an old swelled up head looking and hair straggling down. Said he had big old bushy eyebrows. And his eyeballs was bigger than sisters. The far light was shining off of him. Said he had old long Roman nose with the black hairs and the snot dripping out of it. And said he had old greasy beard and mustache, and whiskers was as sharp as the porcupine stickers. And said his old rotten teeth growed out of his upper lip and down into his beard. Looked like tushes or something. And it was rotten, and old slobber was dripping down in his beard and falling down the fireplace right in front of her face, might near it, and about made her sick. But she said what scared her the worst of all was she found out what was making that racket. Said he had a big old long scaly lizard's tail growing out of his backside with a rattle on the end of it, just like a rattlesnake. His tail was going like a cat's tail goes when it's about to jump. She thought he was about to jump too. She didn't know what to do. She said, what do you want? He looked down there at her, them eyes are shining. Fingers are going like that in front of his face, back and forth. Said, I want my big toe. That little boy over in bed just sort of scooted down between the covers. He knowed right then what that old bloody piece of meat was. He toted it home for supper. It was that booger man's big toe. And it wasn't coming back. It done eat it. It was gone. It might have went the other way right then, but it sure was done that. And I reckon that old booger man had been down in a cave in the ground or something. His toe stuck up in a tater patch or something. They scooted down and listened. Sister said, of course, she didn't know what was going on. She said, what do you mean? Where's my big toe at? Where's my big toe? And fingers just going back and forth. Old dirty nails and look like claws. She said, what's them big old tushes, them big eyes you got for her? All the better to see my supper with. Well, she said, what's them big old long teeth you got first, looking like that? Them old fingers just to go in, he said. All the better to scrunch your bones with. What's that long tail you got for? All the better to sweep your grave clean. My eyes was just a shine. She said, well, what's them big old claws you got for? all the better to call you with. And I reckon he jumped down there, and that one toe tasted so good she popped him on the head of the poker, and they got his other toe for the next evening. That was the big toe. I've heard many ways. I've heard that story told several different ways. Some it was an old man and woman a digging out and they got it. Some it was a little boy and his sister was going to his granny's house for dinner, and they found it in the woods, and sister wanted it and the brother didn't want to because he mistrusted something bad luck was going to happen, and of course it did. And some of them, the little boy and his mom and daddy was there by themselves, and they heard something woo up the road, and the mama got under the bed and the daddy, and when the little boy went, there wasn't no room. They pushed him out, and the booger man come after him. But, you know, they say that there's little truth in every story. I don't know whether this theory could have any chance of holding water, but, you know, back in the old days in Europe, in ancient times, of course, when people were still neighbors conquering other people, a race of people called the Celts came into northwestern Europe and sort of rooted out the people that was there before them. And you know what would happen in cases like that? Usually the survivors of people that lived in these places had to have something useful to the newcomers in order to stay alive. And often they would be railroaded back into either the mountains or into dismal swamps or in caves, and they'd have to have some useful purpose. So, of course, we got fairy tales like Snow White, in which the dwarfs were miners and things like that. Well, it's very possible that at some point some children went and stole something of value from some of these people. And although that they were subservient most of the times, they were very zealous over their treasures. And it's possible that in revenge, the owners had come sneaking up one night and probably killed the children to get their possession back. And so in future generations, parents would use this story and embellish it to keep children in order or make them go to bed. Of course, you know, they were sending them to bed scared to death probably, so I don't know how effective it was. But anyway, that's one possible explanation.